Hi everybody, welcome to Chapter 9, Gender and Society. In this chapter we're going to explore the social components of what gender consists of, how it's developed, how it's maintained over time, and also how it can shift. So a lot of students find this chapter really interesting, and I hope you do too. So first we got to define what's the difference between sex and gender. Sex does not equal gender. Gender does not equal sex. Sex is the biological components that identify men and women by physical characteristics, right? And gender is how those characteristics are defined socially. So, in other words, what is it to be male? What is it to be female? What are the expectations? What are the way these, both groups are supposed to act? And how are they supposed to be represented in society? So when we look at the cultural and social influences on gender, they create gender roles, right? And those are those attitudes, behaviors, beliefs that dictate what is appropriately masculine and feminine in a culture. Okay, so even in the United States, if we looked at the cultural norms of gender by ethnic groups, we may see very, very, very large differences in the way women are expected to live their lives. In some communities, some cultures, the more children a woman has, the more feminine, the better woman she is, the better wife she is. And in some cultures, the more women a man sleeps with after marriage, the more partners he has, the presence of a mistress may define him as more masculine than his peers. And both of those scenarios can be culturally appropriate depending on what group we're talking about. So, and you probably would be very surprised at the two ethnic groups that I'm thinking about, because I think for the masculine, I know this, from my own experiences in the Italian community, it is very, very common for men to take a mistress, and it is seen with some degree of, you're a man's man, you can handle that, and that's a good thing. And women just accept that as, he's just being a guy, that's what they do, and I know in the Amish culture, the more women, the more children a woman is able to bear, the more productive she is in society, because that gives us more means of production on the farm, and, doing God's will and reproduction and whatnot. So whether or not we represent ourselves as more masculine or more feminine has a lot less to do with what we're born with and a lot more to do with what we're born into. Okay? So, with that said, let's talk about this as a dynamic concept, right? When genders are socially constructed, they have the ability to change over time. Now, that's not to say that men become women and women become men. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes what happens is, in more traditional societies, you'll see very strict gender roles. Women will be excluded from certain occupations just based on the fact that they're women. When we talked about, back in Chapter 1, we talked about how many women went and studied sociology but weren't able to teach it, right? They weren't allowed to become professors, and they ended up doing service work, which was probably the very, very, very start of service, or social services. So men, on the other hand, got to do the academic work. They got to do the fun stuff, the research, and all of that, and talk, and publish, and write. That was the way sociology, or the way of the time, those were the two defined roles that were available. Now, as time has come along, we still don't see very many female sociologists until we hit the 60s and the 70s. In the 80s, you get Bell Hooks, you get Patricia Hill Collins, you've got, a whole number of female sociologists that not only have contributed to the basic knowledge that we have and the theories, but have been pretty prolific, and some have gone on to actually become, worldwide, world-recognized scholars. Much like Angela Davis. I mean, she teaches sociology. She's a social activist. But she wouldn't have been able to do that back in the 1950s, 1940s, right? So as I hope you're seeing how sex or gender is becoming more fluid. It's a continuum, right? You can be hyper-masculized or you can be hyper-feminized, And then there's this whole group in the middle. And it's my belief that we all land somewhere on that spectrum, right? You're not one or the other. You're some degree of both, okay? And now, since you have this more, you have fluidity in this, gender roles and the gender norms, sex and the way people define themselves biologically has become a little more fluid. There's always been a phenomenon in whatever culture historically you look at, where you have had women dressing as men or men dressing as women in society. They're coming out and they are presenting themselves as the other sex. And with medical breakthroughs, the technology that we have today, someone that has always identified as a female but was born into a male body can now come out of their assigned sex, right? Or even outside the two gender categories. So there's this idea that, I don't fit into the male, I don't fit into the female. These are not labels that I'm comfortable with. So I am going to step outside of that. Those individuals we normally look at or speak about in terms of being transgendered. Probably one of the most popular and most recognizable transgendered individuals is Laverne Cox from the show Orange is the New Black on Netflix. If you haven't seen that, by the way, you need to check that show out. It is something else. But Ms. Cox has really come out and talked about her experiencing or her experience with her transition, and it's pretty amazing. At East Bay, the freshmen this year are reading a book called She's Not There, and it is the journey of a woman who transitioned from being a male as a child and the struggles that she went through throughout her life. And I show a video to the freshmen, and it's about youth who are now saying, you know what, I am not a little girl, or I'm not a little boy. I feel that I am better, I fit better into this category than that, and how their parents are now dealing with this and being supportive in the process. And that, I think, would be something that's relatively new. So we construct a gendered self, right? So we get to consider what's masculine and what's feminine for us, what is acceptable in our own culture, right? And how it can be, our gender can be displayed, right? So we get a chance to define how society sees us, right? I may be a biological woman, but you know what? I identify more with a masculine identity, so therefore I'm going to display that, and I'm allowed to do that in this country, in this society, in the Bay Area, right? I might be able to do it here in the Bay Area. But if I try to go, back to Philadelphia and I go out into the rural, or forget Philadelphia, if I try to go to Stockton and live as a transgendered individual, my experience is probably going to be dramatically different, right? And I'm going to have a greater pressure to conform to a gender role that people think I belong to, right? To the category I belong to. And that's where biology and society, they mash up, right? We're saying to individuals, you know what, you look like a woman, you have the characteristics of a woman, therefore you need to act like a woman, right? One of the things I hate is when I see little kids at a playground and they get hurt, right? Little kid falls off the swing. Now, if the little kid is a little girl, right? Whoever's there, even strangers, right, will go, oh, you okay, sweetie? Oh, poor thing. Oh, it'll be okay. The young girl's allowed to cry. She's allowed to display emotion. She's allowed to get angry too. But there's a sense of, oh, she must be helped. We need to help her. Little boy, same age, 3 or 4, falls off a swing, starts crying, right? What do you hear normally? Man up. Oh, come on, little man, shake it off. You're all right. You're all right. Don't cry. Big boys don't cry. I hate that. Big boys do cry. And it's okay for big boys to cry. It's society that says, no, it's not okay. I see this with my nephews all the time. And it makes me so angry. Because it gives them this identity then that they have to maintain. They have to not cry. And that's just, it's not okay. But at a very early age, these kids learn what it's like to be male and what it's like to be female, right? And they do it through social interaction. And when they decide, you know what, I'm going to challenge this, right? I'm going to see what I can do to, spice it up. I want to see if I can act like a girl, quote unquote. They are learning more about how to become male than they are about how to become female. That'll make sense in just a second. So, just like everything else, there's agents of gender socialization. A primary means of socialization is the family, right? We figured that out back in chapter 3 or whatever that was. So, kids learn so much from the way their parents behave. Remember little Mateo? Look, Linda, listen, honey. Where did he learn that? Where did he learn that? Just take a wild guess. I wish I could hear what you're saying right now, because I think I know, right? He learned that from the men in his life, the men that surround him. I'm guessing that there's probably a lot of dialogue that goes on in that household. There's a lot of negotiation between little Mateo's mom and his father figure, or grandfather, uncles, the males that are in his life, right? But kids learn this so very early. And, even before a child is born, right, they're being socialized by gender, right? Oh, we're having a little girl, we got to paint the pink room, and we got to do this, and oh, look at this beautiful little dress, and oh my goodness, look at this, oh wow, we're going to have a little boy, and we're going to have the airplanes all over the room, and we're going to, do the room in an airplane motif, right? And all of a sudden, you have set these children up to come home in a gendered environment, right? Instead of it just being, oh, okay, well, let's make sure that, it's a nice neutral color and, that it's something cute to go for either a girl or a boy. We begin this process early on, right? And as we look at this, when little boys and little girls are toddlers, they start to get this sense of what it is to be a male, right? So for little boys, a lot of times, your book uses term wings, and that is that a little boy, he may be struggling with, picking up his toys. There might be something heavy. Well, okay, come on, Jason. You can do it. You can do it. Oh, there you go. Oh, what a big guy. Good for you. You did it. Little girl. Oh, Sophia. That's too heavy, sweetie. Let me help you with that. Oh, yeah, oh, no, I'll get that for you, honey. It's okay. Yeah, see how the language changes? It's different, and it starts so early. Yeah, like I said before, I don't have kids of my own, but I've got these three in my life, and I watch every family gathering. For me is a sociological experiment in gender. It really, truly is, because I see it time and time again. My nephews are treated one way, and my niece is treated a totally different way. So, of course, Aunt Susan gets in there, and she's got to equalize her job a little bit, and then I get in trouble, and I'll get invited back for, the next gathering, and then forget about it. But, I'm a strong believer that both young men and young women, little girls and little boys, need to be treated the same way. And the expectations should be the same, so that they grow up knowing that anything is possible. No matter how they were born, with a disability, without a disability, as a male, with a female. They have to we got to equalize this out, guys. I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, I will stop. But families are the primary agents of gender socialization, even into adulthood for some individuals. Then you get your friends and your peers, right? When the kids start to socialize, and they start to learn very stereotypical gender roles, right? I was at the playground, I had my nephew with me, and these little guys were playing, a group of kids playing, and just a couple little boys, and one of the little boys wanted to play on the swing. He wanted to be the one to swing. And a little girl wanted to do it, and, she was on the swing, and he said, it's my turn, it's my turn. She said, no, only girls swing. And you push. What? Oh, man, she was getting it going on early on, right? She's probably 6, 7 years old. And the little boy said, okay, no problem. And then the other little boy was like, no, I want to get on there. And it was like they were learning how to negotiate this male-female thing at a very early age. What a little girl was supposed to do, what a little boy was supposed to do. See this a lot of times, too, in children's play, right? When they're at school, or maybe they're at a play date, and they play house. I don't know any kid that never played house. All kids play those pretend games, They're getting ready to get into those roles that they'll be in one day. And if the little boy ever wants to be the mommy, oh, no, that is not acceptable, right? The other little boys will make fun of them. Well, little boys aren't mommies, only little girls are mommies, right? Same thing for little girls. Although it doesn't seem to have as much consequence for them if they want to do male gendered roles. And, you see it too on the playground, right? Little boy, maybe he's not, my brother was like this. He wasn't very athletic when he was younger. And people would always say, you throw like a girl. What? You throw like a girl? Well, I would have taken that as a compliment, because I loved playing sports and I was pretty good at it. My brother, on the other hand, Man, that messed our parents up. They were not happy about that, let me tell you. The social dosage effect, right? The more we have someone regulating our gender, the stronger it becomes. And we know that this continues on from high school to college, to the workforce, everywhere we look, we're told what the stereotypical gender behavior is, how it's enforced, and the consequences for breaking it. So the media, another huge player, right? We see so many images through the media about what it is to be female, what it is to be male. Unfortunately, I'm a big Joan Rivers fan. I always loved her, but I hated that show, Fashion Police, because it really was defining, and it still does, it defines what it is to be feminine, what it is to be pretty. And it really just sensationalized this doing gender idea, right? And Joan Rivers on the red carpet would often say, oh, what is she trying to get away with when it was a male dressed in pastel colors, or, a little bit off the mark of what would be considered typical male wear, right? And then finally, when we look at video games, very, very rarely is there a video game where you have a feminine hero, right? Many of them are hypersexualized, meaning that, they're giving images of what the perfect woman is like. And we see this all the time. There was a study that was done in, I want to say it was American Samoa, I'm not sure though. But there was, they studied eating disorder rates amongst teenage girls prior to them being able to view U.S.-based television, and then after. And when they were able to, finally view shows like Friends, they saw an increase in eating disorder rates amongst the youth, the female, young females in the culture. And they think it was because of the body images and the behaviors associated with the women on Friends. Now, that's not to say it's a bad television show, but it definitely did not display or present women in a normal light by any means. And this issue around women and body image is studied quite a bit in sociology, and it is problematic in a lot of ways through the media. It hypes this idea of what you're supposed to look like. And so when I see videos like Pink and Meghan Trainor and these other individuals that are saying, you know what, it's okay to not look the part. It's okay to be you and be happy with your body. It makes me excited because I think it really helps young women. It empowers them to be more like they want to be as opposed to what everybody else wants them to do. Schools, dun dun dun. Yeah, we genderize you as well. There's a hidden curriculum, right? And that's that unspoken stuff that socializes you, right? We will talk more about this when we get into education. But hidden curriculum is speaking to, in this case, what is done in the classroom that reinforces gender roles. So, for instance, when I was in school and in college, it was always, you're not good at math. Been told that for years. Well, you're not good at math, Susan. You're not good at science. People who were good in science, who were good in math, were all the guys. But when it came to English and the creative arts, a lot of times it was the other way around. So this idea that we're socialized from all sides when it comes to our gender is very, very much the case. When you look at history, it's dominated by predominantly male figures. You don't have a lot of women in history whose stories are told to the same degree as men. And many would argue white male figures. I have to agree with it. Now, we know that girls outperform boys when it comes to grades, when it comes to enrollment, AP courses, and graduation rates. But boys consistently outperform girls in the SAT. What? What is that about? What is that about? Well, the reason being, there's a couple different reasons. Number one, the boys that take the SATs tend to be the ones that are good, right, when it comes in terms of grades, enrollment courses, or enrollment in AP and graduation rates. Those are the guys that tend to do really well, top of their class. But there are also different expectations for boys. And it has been argued time and time again that the SAT test actually is written in a way that males will do better because it has been written to their experience more than the experience of a female. And when we talk about education, we'll go there. So Kansas West, Don Zimmerman, these are two of my favorite people, and you've heard me say this a couple of times in this course so far, doing blank, right? Well, they're the ones that came up with this idea of doing gender, right? They're the ones that was like, okay, you know what? Biological category for sex, and it is simply a category. That is it, right? But that category is what defines how you will display and enact your gender. Just like Goffman. Think of it as Goffman, right? Doing gender. Remember you talked about on-stage, off-stage behavior? Well, West and Zimmerman are saying, yeah, it's exactly right. And the sex category determines what presentation of self you're going to put forward, right, that is socially acceptable. So gender isn't really a category so much as it is an activity. So gender is actually the verb that creates the differences that we see, right? And even though it doesn't have a biological basis, gender doesn't, it appears that way because it's so natural. Everybody does it, right? I mean, people get freaked out when they don't know the person that they're talking to, when they can't figure out their gender, you know? They get freaked out. It's like, you know, what are you? You know? What are you? Don't you love the way that sounds? What are you? Well, I'm me, right? But 9 times out of 10, we take someone's gender for granted, just like we do with race, right? Someone that might identify themselves as a different racial category than what the physical characteristics may show, right? Same thing happens with gender. You know, they may present in one way, but identify something totally differently, okay? Gender as an activity, doing gender. It's an excellent book. I wish we had time to get into it. But if I ever teach that class, you'll read it in that if you take the class. So, gender inequality, right? There's a term called the second shift. You may have heard about this. And it's all the domestic labor that takes place that's unpaid and that are done by women when they come home from their paid employment. So, you know, I know we have some working mothers in the class. And even if you're not a working mother, if you came from a background where your mother worked outside of the household, you know that women come home. You know, their day starts early, right? They make us breakfast, they get us ready for school, they get us to school, they go to work, they come home, they make us dinner, they may help with homework, they have to do the laundry, they have to clean up the house, you know, they put the kids to bed, and then they are doing, you know, the rest of the stuff that they need to do. And when this was originally, the second shift was originally published, I think it was Barbara Enright that did it. And when it was first published, she said, you know, this is like so not fair because women are spending more time doing this unpaid domestic labor than they are doing for paid employment or that their male counterparts are doing, right? And through this study, she found a couple of really interesting things. that when women are unmarried and they live with men, they don't spend as much time in the housework as they do, even when they have children in the household and the number of paid hours a week worked is the same as their married counterparts. So, these guys are like, well, what is that about? America's like, why is that? That doesn't make sense. You would think that it would be normal, or it would be consistent across the married, unmarried spectrum. But marriage, they found, has this traditionalizing effect, right? Even when both men and women say, oh, no, we share everything. We're a totally egalitarian household. We don't do gender in our household. We know that's not true because marriage in itself, heterosexual marriage in itself, has a tendency to impose those gender roles in marriage, right, on the individuals in said marriage. So you see women acting like wives. You see men acting like husbands, and it's an interesting phenomenon to me. I've never studied gay couples or lesbian couples, but I think a lot of the same things hold true to some degree. There's roles that each partner plays because it's the way we have been socialized, right? One person has to serve this role. One person has to serve that role. And it's hard for us to kind of unpack that and realize the roles are what we define them as within the relationship. So there's a lot of gender inequity still out there in higher education. Women didn't really go to college or universities, with the exception of women's colleges, until the passage of Title IX in 1972, which meant that, hey, guess what? Everybody has equal access. And you have to spend as much money over here on women's stuff as you do men's stuff. And women have made some pretty darn significant gains. We graduate high school at higher rates, have higher GPAs, and there's also more women that attend men. There's also more women that attend and graduate college than men that hold a college degree. Yet women still make less than men do, right? And when we look at communities of color, we see even a greater disparity. And when we talk about higher education, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to leave it there for now, okay? Just stay with me. So that gender wage gap is, that your book talks about, it's just the difference between the earnings of women who work full-time and the earnings of men who work full-time. So on average, right, women make 77 cents for every dollar that men make. And then when we look at communities of color, we see those, or minority groups, we see that disparity increase even more. But what's interesting is many times in these groups, the wages will go the opposite direction. The disparity increases. Women of color are making more money than men of color in certain communities. And I think that's tied to the education gap. So there's still gender inequity in the world. Trust that. So there you go. That'll give you an idea of the gender wage gap by race and ethnicity. That was back in 2011. And this is individuals who both hold a college degree and they don't. But if we took college into account, I think that you would see, as I said before, communities of color, that disparity would favor women a lot more than men. So, okay, Got that? All right. Economics. All right, glass ceiling. You've probably heard this term many times before. That is where women can only go so far up. And they can see that next level in their career, but they just can't seem to get there due to a structural obstacle. So maybe there is a policy in play. I can't imagine that there'd be a policy anymore, but maybe there's the all-boys club, and it's keeping someone, a woman who is very qualified, out of a leadership role, because you have to be connected, right? If we look at the glass ceiling in politics, I would argue Hillary Clinton's kind of seen that. She has become a senator, she was Secretary of State, but whether or not she ever gets through the glass ceiling and becomes the President of the United States, I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think that's going to happen for a while, because I think it's still an all-boys club, to be honest with you. And it is not saying, well, it is what it is, and hopefully at some point that'll end. So we see men having the same thing happen, that they have the glass elevator or escalator. I'm sorry, guys, I'm a little tired right now. So that's kind of the same thing, except you don't see it. It's something that is kind of obscured. And that's when men get a boost because they're in female-dominated occupations. So, for instance, a perfect example of this would be nursing, right? There are a lot of nurse supervisors who are men, right? Who are able to get more prestigious positions in hospitals, in the nursing profession, that maybe don't have the same amount of time in as a woman does, and that has, better credentials, quite frankly. So it's subtle. These two things are very subtle, but they happen, right? And there's segregation in the workplace compared to traditionally female and male occupations. There are, we do it in higher education. We still do it in higher education, If you were to take a look at the skilled trades, you would find that many, many, many men occupy those positions as opposed to women, because women don't traditionally, haven't been taught that those are occupations available to them. And it's slowly changing, but it's still very heavily segregated into these gendered occupations. So, Gilman, I like her take on it, right? She's like, you know what? In the history of relationships, men and women share yeah, you can read. And that's where, there's an kind of quid pro quo kind of thing going on, in that the sexual relationship was an economic one, right? Because back in the day, women were dependent upon men financially. If your husband died, he probably left everything to the firstborn son. Well, you went back out and you found somebody suitable and you married them. It was more about the economics. This idea that we marry for love, please, that is such a new concept. The history of human relationships shows us that we tended to marry for economic gain, right? What resources does this person have that I can share with? And, you look it up. Remember when we talked about class, you don't usually marry up or down. You can, but when we even look at it in today's world, that doesn't usually happen, right? And when it does happen, women tend to marry up. Men don't, right? Because men are in this position that they have been socialized to believe that they are the providers, right? So I like Gilman. I mean, we're looking at, 120 years ago, and she's talking about this stuff, and I think you could still see it in play today. I think the most popular term for this type of marriage would be gold digger, okay? Talcott Parsons, right? He believed, of course, as a functionalist, that you have to have these roles in society. You have to. Because you have two different worlds that society operates in, the private and the public, right? So women get socialized into doing the private sphere stuff, right? They're the ones that maintain the home, and that's very important. Men, they get to do the stuff that is going to allow them to operate in the world and be a part of it. Women are to be quiet and not seen outside of the home, when men have to be seen. Mad Men, real good example of what life was like in the 1950s. And if you look at the women on that show, with very few exceptions, they're all struggling to stay in that private sphere, right, of influence. But men, no, they have to be socialized early on to be dominant and to have their own voice in the world. So the feminine mystique, Betty Friedan, she's awesome too. And she really argued that the stereotypes that women have in the U.S. are really not what the actual experiences are. So this idea that, back in the 60s, oh, you're going to get married and you're going to have a wonderful husband and he's going to take care of you financially and you're going to have all these children and people are just going to adore you and you're going to have this great life, right? Well, that wasn't the reality for many women. And so because of that, because there was this women were kind of set up in a way to think that that was the ultimate outcome for them. And it wasn't, especially for working class families. We like to think that women stayed at home prior to 1970. No, there were many, many families out there of all groups in the working class who had both parents working outside of the household. My great-grandmother, she worked outside of the household. She did laundry and sewing and things like that in the home, but she still took an outside work to do that. And Betty Friedan just says, you know what? You got to get past the stereotypes. We can't set up women to fail, okay? And feminism isn't, her book sparked the second wave of feminism. But feminism isn't something new. I mean, it started out, with women's suffrage movement, and that was the first wave, right? When and it didn't just happen here in the United States. I mean, there was a women's rights movement in Europe as well. This idea that women weren't chattel, they weren't up and belonging. They should have an active voice in the world that they live in. Well, that was started back then, and then in the 60s and 70s, it saw a resurgence. Okay, so I really, really, really don't like it when people just say, oh, you're a feminist. No, I'm a different kind of feminist, right? You're allowed to have different views as a feminist. You can have liberal feminism, you can have socialist feminism, radical feminism. I did a study on women in the Mormon church, in the Latter-day Saint church, and their view of feminism. And their view of feminism was very much different. It was about staying at home, empowering their children, empowering their husband. That was how they defined feminism. Didn't mean it was any less than what a liberal feminist would say. It was the way that they described their empowerment. And, it's part of this third wave of feminism. So, There is a sociology of masculinity. I've talked a lot about women. I'm going to talk about men now. Hope you don't mind. So there's 4 basic rules, right? Don't be a sissy, right? Don't cry. You know, don't throw like a girl. Be good at sports. All of that stuff. You're going to be a manly man. The second rule, you got to be a big deal. You got to be a top dog. You got to have the wealth, the power, and the status. If you're not the top dog in your group, then you're not doing it something right? You also never show your emotions. When, that is, you're supposed to be the emotional center of the family. You're supposed to be the one that's the rock, People come to you when they need help. You don't go to them. And, for the last one is, you know what? Go for it. Just be daring, be aggressive, just do stupid stuff, whatever it takes. Just be a man's man, right? Well, those are the 4 basic rules. And that's really, really, really not good for men. It gives off a false sense of what it is to be a man. Men that don't, by their very nature, don't fit these rules. They don't meet these rules. There's a backlash against these men. You don't work? You stay at home and you're a father? What? Oh, dude, you are like, you're whipped. No, he's being a good father. My brother-in-law is a firefighter, and he's like 6'4". He's one of these manly men. He hunts. He makes his own beer. He is just, doing really well financially. And he and I used to go ride motorcycles together, all kinds of stuff. It was a great time, right? He's a daring kind of guy. But when it came to raising his son, I will never forget the day I was at their 2nd birthday party, and my nephew, Wyatt, this 2-year-old, threw his sister's doll across the room, and it skidded and it hit the wall or something. And his father was standing there. Now, this kid's little, 6'4" dude, and pretty buff, and he said, Wyatt, you can pick up that baby right now. He went over and picked up the little one, the little baby doll, and he brought it back to his dad, and he said, you give it a hug and you say you're sorry. And, he did, and he said, that's not the way to be a good daddy. I say that, and I still cry now, because here is this person that you would see out on the street and you go, oh, he's a man's man. Yet, he's trying to teach his son not to be aggressive. Not to, be a bad person by beating people up. And, it just was so unexpected. And I was just so proud of him because it was just one of those moments where I was like, oh, man, maybe he's doing something right, And I've never seen Wyatt throw another baby doll across the room, which is probably good. But it's this idea of this hegemonic masculinity, right? Where it's by not teaching Wyatt that, right? How do you say it? Had he just let that go, Wyatt would have learned that it's okay to be violent against a baby, because my niece is learning that baby is, something to take care of. And I'll be right back. Sorry, guys. Oops. Okay, everybody, sorry about that. Anyway, so that is the sociology of masculinity, and there is, it's a huge, huge area that is really getting a lot of attention now, as opposed to before. There's also men's studies that has come out of this tradition, and a lot of it has been based on feminist theory, to be honest with you. What is it that are expected of women, and how does that apply to men? Because there's 2 sides of the coin. When we talk about families, we're going to talk about domestic violence. And if you really want to see the gender inequality, take a look at how many reported incidences there are of domestic violence against women, and then look at the domestic violence rates against men. And look at the experiences of men who are abused in relationships, because it happens. Oftentimes, it is assumed that they're being the aggressor, and even when they're not, there's no support system for them because of these four basic rules, right? Well, you can't be getting beat up by a girl. What are you talking about? Only women get beat up by girls, The sturdy oak syndrome rule, never showing your emotions. Well, you know what? You can't be upset by this. It's a woman. Come on. Only women cry about this kind of stuff. And, it flies against the golden rule that my brother learned, is never hit a woman. So a man is taught never to hit a woman, regardless of whether it's in self-defense or not. And that doesn't even go to the experience of individuals who are victims of domestic violence and same-sex relationships, which we'll talk about when we talk about family. So it's not easy being a male either, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And it needs to be studied, and we need to look at masculinity in the same ways that we look at femininity. You've got to study both sides of the coin and see what role society is playing in this inequality game that we see. And finally, let's look at gender in a global context. Millions upon millions of women are denied an education and are illiterate in their home countries. They are statistically globally more likely to be denied medical care. They are overly represented in the population of those individuals trafficked into the sex trade. And in many countries still, women are denied the right to own or inherit property and to vote. Women in other countries are also less likely to go to school, earn a living wage. And one of the scariest, I think, is that when a woman's family's resources are scarce, and that includes food, women tend to be the ones that are less likely to eat. Whether that's by choice or that's the way they've been socialized. I think that speaks a lot to the experience of women around the world. And there is a lot of push now globally to help educate women around the world. Oprah Winfrey has got her girls' school. I don't want to say that is the only example. There are many examples of organizations that are trying to develop primary and secondary institutes of learning for young girls and women. Also, women's health and reproductive technologies have just escalated and grown leaps and bounds over the last 40 years. So we're seeing women live longer, live through childbirth, and have a very clear understanding and control over their reproductive rights. And finally, a good friend of mine is actually involved, she's an anthropologist, and she's involved in microfinancing. And what that is she and another group of women help women in developing countries set up businesses and gain financing through the World Bank in order to produce goods on a small scale and then export them for profit. And while that's kind of bringing capitalism into a non-capitalist society, in a sense, it also empowers women by giving them an opportunity to make a living wage and to gather resources and have access to all the things that they've been denied in the past. So I think that does it, my friends, that does it for Sociology of Gender. It is awesome. We're going to be talking more about this stuff later on, but, in other chapters, gender will come up again. And I hope you have a terrific weekend. Hopefully this is one of the last ones you're going to look at. And if it's not, then keep on trucking and doing a great job that you're doing. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.